everyone. Can you hear me okay back there? All right. I want to make sure that our interpreter is ready. Great. So you're welcome tonight. We're excited to present two candidates to the community and staff for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer position at the City of Battle Creek. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rebecca, and I'm the City Manager in the City of Battle Creek. This has been an exciting adventure, so I know how we got there in just a second. I just welcome everyone and to let everyone know we're live interpreting in Spanish and Burmese and of course American Sign Language. So if you're asking questions or speaking, you might want to do that a little slower than you usually do. This is slower for me and I'm learning so that they can interpret properly. So thank you. It's good to see. I see some Commissioner Mayor Mark Benke. I see Commissioner Kathy Bender-Wilson. I think I just saw Commissioner Gray. I don't think I'm missing any other commissioners. I appreciate the staff that I see out there, and I appreciate all the community members that came. This is really a community position. It grew out of the request of the city to do an equity audit shortly after all of the protests and vigils for the murder of George Floyd in that area. In frame, the national narrative is certainly changing at that time. I'm thankful that in Battle Creek, most all of our marches and vigils and candlelights and demonstrations were peaceful without any damage to the community. I think that shows a lot about the importance of those relationships with the city, not only my administration, but with the elected officials and with our wonderful community partners, and many of them I see here tonight. Thank you very much to the Burma Center for hosting us this evening. Really appreciate that. But anyway, so part of all of that national narrative during that time was Chief Blocker and I met with the Urban League and the African American Collaborative about what we could do, what more could we do during this time period. And they had some specific asks of the city, and one of them was for the city to undertake an equity audit. Please know that is not anything that we've ever done before, and so we were certainly agreeable with that, but not exactly sure what we were going to be doing or asking. So we were incredibly grateful that the Urban League and the members of the African American Collaborative helped us put together a scope of work. Then they served on the review panel to review all of the proposals that came in for that, and then ultimately selecting MGP Consulting out of Florida. It was overwhelming to see national consultants wanting to come to Battle Creek, Michigan to do this equity audit. It was overwhelming because we've never done it. And it was overwhelming because, we were going to invite an outside entity into our community to do a pretty deep dive into the city organization as a unit of local government. And so that was in two phases. First phase was around the equity audit itself. The commission granted the contract to MGP Consulting. And phase one was to take a look at our human resource processes and procedures. Talk about a challenge. When you talk about a unit of local government, we have all kinds of codes, ordinances, policies, documents that really do guide the work that we do. And they took it upon themselves to go through all of that. Pretty daunting. But really what we wanted to do was make sure that we identified right away any barriers that we have as a city organization to being a diverse organization, an equitable organization, and one that reflects the community that we serve. So, that was kind of where we were headed, taking a look internally, because we certainly wanted to address any internal barriers that we had from an HR perspective, as prospective employees took a look at us to be their employer. We know right now with the challenge is to find talent, both recruiting and retaining. We need to do all we can to make sure we're any barriers we have to be a good employer and to be supportive of a diverse organization. So that was phase one. Phase two was around police and community relations. It seems like we are always asking the question around police and community relations. However, this was a specific defined scope about the relationship, and again, identifying any barriers we had to the service the police department does to the community. What were we not thinking? who knew that when we first started the scope, we would have a global pandemic? So it feels like it took us forever to get to this particular point. But I think it was worth the journey. And if any of you heard me talk about this before, this is a journey. And we look at this as just our first step as an organization to be a more equitable, inclusive, and diverse organization. So what we received, just recently, it's only been 2 months, was that final equity audit and recommendations from MGT Consultants. And they provided that and shared that with not only the Human Relations Board, but with the City Commission as well. So that audit certainly was complete, and there was a lot more questions to ask, let me tell you, because I appreciate the feedback we got from the Human Relations Board about this is a great first step, but what next? Same that we've heard in the community about this document. But what we asked them to do initially is to complete the audit with those 2 phases and then create a diversity, equity, inclusion action plan. That's what the city is in possession of right now. But I will tell you that one of the biggest recommendations out of this first step was the creation and hiring of a diversity, equity, and inclusion officer position for the city. This person, not trying to scare people who might consider the position, but would help lead and facilitate the work of our organization around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sounds like a huge task. We want to make sure that whoever becomes our very first diversity, equity, inclusion officer, we set them up for success. And here's where it will take the community, not only the community within the city, but all of you who are not city employees. We see this very much as an externally facing position as well as an internally facing position, because some of the hardest questions we've been asking is, what are the barriers of our organization in service delivery to the public? That's a big ask. It's a huge question, since we are a full service city and we provide every range of possible public services that you could think of, mostly. We don't have a beach, so we ask that. Right, we don't have we have Willard Beach, but we don't really have a large coastal area. However, I think we provide probably everything the city could do. So that recommendation for a diversity and inclusion officer led to the posting of the position. Everybody knows that. Getting it out, word of mouth, on a lot of job boards, things like Indeed and LinkedIn, Hispanic Resource Network, the Black Public Administrators Association, the International City Manager Association, and anywhere that we could put that out to try to find those individuals who would be interested in our role. And we were really overwhelmed by the number of applicants that we had. So it's very hard to find who is going to be that position. First of all, we've never had the position before, but second of all, we were going to lean into our community partners again to be part of the interview team, and I appreciated that. Almost that same team that helped us put the scope of work together and choose MGT were involved in the interviews for this role. So what you get to hear tonight is our top 2 candidates. They are going to come, and I'm going to give you a little bit of background. They're going to come and they're going to give you a little bit of information about their background, and then they're going to talk to you about how they would see taking that equity audit and our equity action plan and turning that into action. So how are they going to turn those into actionable items, meeting the goals and objectives of that, and maybe things that we haven't thought about yet and may not be in there. Not trying to scare poor Laura, who's going to go first. It's really hard to go first, but we're excited to get to this particular point. If you're wondering, the second candidate is not here. We did not want to create an unfair advantage. So that candidate will remain outside until Laura is complete. We anticipate this will be about 45 minutes for Laura. We want to make sure that we leave enough time for questions, for you to ask questions. So let's go ahead and get started. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Laura Orta. She currently works as the director of the DEI and Center for Engaged Inclusion at Lansing Community College. She lives in Jackson, and I think you will enjoy learning a little bit about her and what she thinks is next steps for Battle Creek. So Laura, welcome.
Thank you for that great introduction, and as I go forward, you'll see that I may be able to shorten my presentation some because she went through some of the steps that I made certain was in my presentation as well. So welcome, everyone. I truly appreciate each of you taking time out of your schedule to come and be a part of this, to come and hopefully ask questions at the end, get to know me and the other candidate a little bit more, and make the best decision for Battle Creek and its community. When I do any kind of presentation, it's very important to start your presentation off with an agenda. Why is that? Because if you are neurodiverse, having an agenda is something that you need to check in on to know what's going to happen so that you relieve some of the anxiety you have around what's going to happen in this presentation. Are we going to have to do an icebreaker? Are we going to have to do other things? And so having an agenda in your second slide or your very first slide is really important. So where we are going, and you'll see that I've already included myself as a member of the Battle Creek community in this presentation. There's an introduction of me, a little bit more information, and a wellness check, talking about why a DEI officer is important, and talking about your equity audit, the human resources and the policing component of it, next steps that I have recommendations for, and then embedding DEI plus. And I say plus because to me it's DEIAJ plus. Like accessibility, access, and justice go in there. So a little bit about me. My pronouns are they, him, and here. HRIR is enunciated like here. I'm originally from Southwest Detroit, married right out of high school to an individual who had joined the Navy, and we traveled and lived around the world, and I continue to have the wanderlust to go all around the world. I've had some amazing opportunities. I've worked as an ombudsperson for the Pacific Fleet Admiral while I was on Guam. There's been multiple things that I have done. You see me standing up here, I'm very white presenting. I know that everywhere I go. But I am a multiracial individual. I'm diversely able, so that's the new terminology in the field for individuals who used to speak, who said they had disabilities or needed accommodations. You say diversely able so that you don't have to identify neurodiverse to physically diverse. I've completed my Master of Public Administration at Central Michigan University, and I'm finishing up my dissertation in the PhD program at CMU. It's based on looking at how an organization presents itself and how presenting itself really matches up to what they do. I currently live in Jackson, and I have been practicing, learning, exploring. I never say I'm an expert in DEIAJ because it changes every second the language does. There's always something new. There's always new things to talk about. And right now I am working for Lansing Community College, and I also have my own consulting firm that I've been running since 2019 called DIBS Collaborative. And I'm going to be stopping and taking a lot of drinks. So the wellness check. This is take a moment and think about how you are right now. If we were doing this virtually, I would have hashtags that you could put in the chat to identify. So look at all these. Maybe you're more than one. I know one that I am is hot, right? We've all come to this event after a long day, and we're bringing in many emotions, and that's great. Acknowledging them helps you be your most authentic self and your most engaging individual present in the entire communications. So I hope that if you are sad or feeling a little disappointed, that you know there's lots of people in this room you can reach out to. So that's our wellness check. So DEI, Inclusion Officer, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer in Battle Creek. How we arrived here, steps to support your equity audit findings and future work. So Michelle's done a great job of going over how we got here already. I even went back to the Kellogg Foundation's equity information where they said that Battle Creek needs to embed an equity approach in everything we do. That comes down to finances, that comes down to housing, food equity. There isn't an issue out there that equity, diversity, inclusion doesn't play a part in. Our community's culture of diversity is intersectional. So what intersectionality or intersectional means is you see all of these different terms up here. You saw a little bit bio about myself, that I identify with the LGBTQ community. I am diversely able. I've lived all around the world. That makes up who I am with so many other things. We are not just one story or one piece. We are not this race or this identity. We all are multifaceted individuals. Twice said, you can't have unity without diversity. Right? If we had everybody was exactly the same, it would be an agreement, but it wouldn't be unity, because no one would be bringing a different thought to the process. So we have to have diversity to have unity. Now, getting to that is the struggle that we're all trying to work out. So the importance of DEI officer. I've been talking all day. Thursdays are my training day. A DEI officer should be a reflection of the societal values of whatever organization the individual is in. So if I were the individual that was chosen, I would absolutely take the time to really dig into the community, dig into the offices and say, what do you need? Where aren't you being heard? It's somebody who is ensuring the rights of all individuals are being thought about, addressed, and met. It's that individual making sure things are running. If we didn't have heads of the road commission and everybody kind of did it, we would not have as good of roads, and I'll do good in quotes because it's Michigan, as we already do. We would have just kind of chaos about it. A DEI officer should also always support the mission and vision of the organization. Everything that they do should reflect back into the mission and vision. And it creates a culture of respect, diversity, education within a group of individuals. Because I'm always going to be there saying, hey, how about if we approach it this way? So think about the word professional. Okay? Think about if you were going to hire somebody, what that looks like to hire a professional in your area. It's going to look really different than what a professional to me looks like. A professional to me, t-shirts, shorts, dyed hair, lots of piercings, tattoos, none of that to me aligns to what a professional is for most jobs. We still have a culture, just based in white supremacy, that we are individuals who should be wearing suits, ties, dresses, slacks. Right? And when I say white supremacy, I'm not talking about groups of individuals. I'm talking about when we set up race as a society, way back in the day. Race was created so that people could be equal. So in your equity audit, I divided it into 3 areas, simply like you already had in a great way. There's policy and procedures, there's employee engagement, and external communication and engagement. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've done in the past for organizations. As I go through this, I will also talk about what I've done in the past and will do in the future here when we get to those slides. But when there's that conversation about recruit, retain and engage there with employees. What does that look like? So for that, I would stop and go back to where is our pipeline? What are our high schools and community colleges doing? Do students think working for public service is something that's important and valuable and will give them the amazing skills that it has for me? Or do they think, oh, that's a city job, oh, that's a state job, and it has no value in where I want to be? So we've got to get out there and talk about how great it is to be a part of public service. Public service scans anything anyone's going to do in the future. And so why not come in and give back to your community, get paid to do it, and learn skills? So I took LCC's program, their recruitment and their hiring and their retention, and I really flipped it upside down. What they were doing for their hiring is whoever group was hiring, let's say the psychology department, they would have 2 psychologists, professors, and maybe someone from another department sit on their recruitment board and talk to individuals. That's really nice. That's not representative of Lansing Community College or Lansing area. And so I shook it up and said, you've got to have diversity. And not just visible diversity, which is going to be racial, right? You have to have diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of age here. They all get a 90-minute training from me that lasts only a year, and then they have to do it again on understanding where there are issues in hiring. What are I do 7 of the top biases in hiring, starting with unconscious and implicit bias. We all have that. There's not a person on this earth that doesn't have unconscious or implicit biases. And why is that? Because it was our tactic for staying safe. In your creation story, however that is for you, however people got on this earth, to stay safe, individuals had to say, are you similar to me or are you different? And if you're different, I'm afraid. We still do that the minute we meet somebody new. It's a millisecond thing. It doesn't make us bad, right? That's one of our problems with DEI. People think, oh, I must be bad because I didn't get that right. No, it's words, it's trainings, it's emotions, it's in our amygdala that makes us respond that way immediately. So I teach them things like that. We talk about cases. What would you do if? How would you handle this? And then for the retention, I just completed and am presenting the data on a stay interview that we did with the entire campus. It was 75 questions, an email that went out 7 times to all the employees. And we had focus groups where everyone could come, and then we had special groups, no administrators, no supervisors, and then the administrators and supervisors. And we let them tell us, right? We took the quantitative or the number data, and we asked them to expand on it and give us their voice, their qualitative data. So we're looking at that, and we're already making changes based on that information. Here in Battle Creek, you also found out that there needs to be a bolstering of the anti-harassment protections and ADA guidelines. So the way that you do that is you talk about it. You put the information out there, where you talk about what does harassment look like, what do you do if you're experiencing it, what are the steps. You explain it in a way that everyone can understand. You address the expansion of educational and training opportunities. If you're an employee with the city and say you want to start to learn how to do IT work, we should be supporting that, letting people be the best person they are. The employee engagement, I see that as providing DEI initiatives such as we could all read a book every year and provide that book in multiple forms for Audible, different languages, and have sessions where we sit around and talk about it. Because that's having the one-to-one conversation that you need to have related to DEI. Also, lots and lots of trainings. My trainings I try to keep really fun because I certainly was the employee and still am. When someone says you have to do this training, I have to do this training. So I try to make the trainings really relatable to what individuals need. Also, getting that external communication out there. A web portal for the DEI happening in the city. Now, we could call it transparent and say it's a piece of glass and then put up pieces of paper and say, this is what we really want you to focus on this glass, and fill the whole piece of glass up. Well, that puts down on transparency, right? When I have directed you with only what I want you to know, then my glass is no longer transparent. So to me, transparency is authentic communication on everything. This is where we failed. This is where we succeeded. Now we're going to move on to the police. So I have a long history of working with military police and police agencies all across this country. I also had the pleasure of working with Seoul, South Korea, and their police, which was a really interesting experience because in Seoul, the people protest and shut down the freeways. And the Seoul police, yep, that's happening, here's a new route for you to take. So it was a really interesting way to see how a whole other country and culture addressed the things that happen. I recommend creating a community advisory board for law enforcement, or acronyms, CABLE. Washtenaw County is already doing this, and it includes their prosecutor and the defense attorney for the county. And it is a fantastic oversight and looking at where problems arose, and they say when they can't solve a problem, they say this problem is beyond us. It's not something that as community members we can address. The encouraging attendance and participation in affinity community groups and requiring cadets to volunteer, both of those absolutely, but we should put them in both. City employees, police, fire, everybody should have that. Why not say this is important to us and give everybody 8 hours a year that we pay them to go and do this? And then we tie it into performance review. What have you done for DEI as part of your performance review? If this is going to be something that's important and sustainable when Laura is not here anymore, sustainable when you're moving forward, and maybe Battle Creek gets to the point where they feel like, okay, we can do this on our own because we have embedded it so much and we're paying attention. It should be in our job descriptions when we're hiring individuals. We need you to talk about what voice you're bringing here. We need to create actionable and measurable DEI initiatives. I worked with the cadets at Lansing Community College, and I go in and give them training on LGBTQ2S+. I also do sexism training because one of the second biggest problems is, first is racial. Indigenous individuals are at the most harmed by police per population, and then it's Black African American individuals next. But we need to know how to work with individuals who need ASL interpretation, autism, crisis intervention, cultural humility. The second biggest issue in policing is sexism. There's still this huge issue, and I'm going to talk about a way that we might address that a little bit, where in any masculine, there's required movement in a job, like with the military, like with emergency providers, those individuals still have a really male mind. And so working with cadets about where that comes from and having them see where it's happening in their lives. Sometimes just knowing it's there is all that someone will move to. And then the external communication. I think we can use the Citizen Academy of Alumni to participate in area job and career fairs and create a portal, again, a webpage. Now, that encouraging attendance and participation of affinity community groups, I want to go back to that and say, absolutely, police should be encouraged, but before they go, they should have the cultural training on the generational trauma of that group from the policing units, right? The African American Black individuals in this country carry so much generational trauma on their everyday existence. LGBTQ individuals, Latin, Latina, Latino, Hispanic, Latinx, everyone has this generational, this happened to me. That's actually a bias. It's called a heuristic bias because as soon as you see a police officer and you're in a group of people that identify a certain way, you're going to remember something that happened to either yourself or someone else. So we're going to go and remind ourselves again about what good is the DEI journey with the DEI officer. So DEI is the future. I could just stop right there, period. But it is the future of Battle Creek. As you can see in that circle that provides strategic priorities, all of those components are already in that equity action plan that was done for you. They are also all parts of the areas that I talked about. Once you do the training, you recruit a better workforce, but you also re-engage the workforce that's here. If you've been here for 15, 20 years, this is going to change the way that you do your job. It's going to change it in small ways, but change in our job is scary. Why? Because our lizard brain comes out and goes, it's different, I'm scared of it. It makes us feel uncomfortable. We need to create a DEI statement for Battle Creek. There isn't one on the webpage, and that should be there to support the mission and vision statement. And we need to celebrate, as one of your awesome videos on your Facebook page says, the microcosm of America reflected in Battle Creek. These are the same words I used earlier, talking about a DEI officer being a reflection of the societal values, creating a culture of respect, and promoting DEI, supporting the mission and vision of Battle Creek, and ensuring the rights of all individuals are supported. First task that I would undertake is speak with communication influencers all around Battle Creek, both within the city, the police department, fire department, and out in the community. Who are the individuals that people listen to? I've done DEI for a lot of factories, and when you change something in a factory, you can only do it by really small increments. It's very upsetting to factory workers because they're very routinized individuals. So speaking with those influencers, I can go and talk to the manager of the line. I can talk to them and think that they're the individual that influences, but they're probably not. It's probably someone else that's head of the group. So it's going in, asking the correct questions to tease out who are people really listening to when it comes to change, when it comes to new ideas, and then working with those individuals. But creating that DEI action plan off of this blueprint that is beautifully set up for the first year, it really is an amazing audit and will make this position not have to completely build from the bottom up. I have done walking into new positions created, never have before, in a majority of my employment experiences around the world. And so, to me, that's a natural thing. And to have this document blueprint that your plan created, it's fantastic, and I absolutely I'm thankful for it. It was exciting to read. I never thought when I was a kid that I would be excited to read a 74-page document one night. So, and then that creating DEI websites with the mind of transparency and communication. Because again, if we're transparent but tell you what we want you to know, we're not being really transparent. Audre Lorde, one of my heroes, it says there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. That's that intersectionality that we saw on screen earlier, where all the components of who we are as individuals bring in a multifaceted experience. I'm experiencing this differently than the individual who was signing my right, or to the individual sitting in the back of the room. We're each different. If you have identical twins, they're going to have differences. Their intersectionality is different from one another. Maybe one of them likes country music, which was created by the African American people in this country. Maybe one of them likes to listen to classical music. Who knows? So future tasks. I think that the implementation, assessment, and then re-evaluation of all the things that the Equity Action Plan talk about and that I have done with Lansing Community College, with the police there, with court systems in Michigan. I worked both in Wayne County's court system, the largest in our state, and I worked up in Isabella County and then District, which is a couple of counties together. We need to show where we succeed and then step back and say, this is where we failed, how can we switch it? Create new DEI action and goals, including digital badging for employees in the community. High school students are getting things called micro-credentials, which say they focus specifically on an area. It's also becoming really popular in nonprofits, such as if you're getting your undergraduate or your master's in a nonprofit, getting these badges are kind of seen as you get a specialty in an area. And right now I have 7 DEIAJ plus badges that we can roll out here. Teaching how DEI and leadership is important. Teaching how understanding the impact of culture is important. I also think we should embed DEI in all areas, as I talked about, such as performance reviews. The Chamber of Commerce is going to need their own DEI person to talk to their constituents, because that's a different language than public service. Very similar, but if you have that symmetry and unity, then it works much better. I talked about the 30 by 30 initiative for police a little earlier, I believe. So what is that? That's increasing the applications and hopefully the retention of female or individuals who identify as female officers in a police force by 2030. And again, Washtenaw County and I are working on that right now. Looking through some of the old things that Battle Creek did, there's the Brine Criminal Justice Innovation, or BCJI. I like the Learn and Doing project. When I talked about before, let's embed that going out in the community, put 8 hours of leave time so someone can go and do that. That's doing those things. Bringing in Learn by Doing projects, get that cultural humility. So what is cultural humility? We know that cultural competency is acknowledging that there are many other people in the world besides me who do things differently. I was amazed because a friend of mine was telling me back when I was a teenager that in her house they mixed multiple flavors of Kool-Aid together. They never just made Kool-Aid out of one packet, because they wanted all these different flavors. They put fruit in it sometimes. They put herbs and stuff in it, and I was just amazed. Where I came from, having just a packet of Kool-Aid was a luxury, and so to think about having multiple packets and mix them all up, that blew my mind. And so we would have Kool-Aid parties. and everybody would come in and create Kool-Aid where we worked. It was a lot of fun. Then the next big step is something that wasn't addressed, and we need to approach the wellness, not just the physical, but the emotional, the mental, the financial, all of the things that help individuals move through their day. We are now in multiple pandemics around the world. This is the first time that the United States has ever experienced one and shut down for it. We also have a new endemic coming into this country and around the world with a horrible name that's impacting our individuals who are from or have roots in the Latin America and Caribbean cultures, what individuals outside of here identify as monkeypox. So we need to address the well-being. When the George Floyd change. When the murder of George Floyd happened, how many of you in this room asked people that you work with how they were doing? You don't have to raise your hands to think about it. When they came to work the next day, did you ask your friends or your coworkers and your colleagues, how are you today? Because that was a life-changing event. 9/11, we all talked about it, but did we ask each other, how are you doing? How is this going to impact what you're doing? Do we want a culture of just come to work and get done what you're supposed to get done without having these conversations? Absolutely not. That's not why you did this equity audit. That's not why you're hiring a DEI manager for the city. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you all so much. I'm here for questions. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Terry Gupta, and I was just going to ask a question. If you're selected for that position, are you planning on relocating to Battle Creek?
So we just bought our house in February in Jackson. It would absolutely be, I really, when I work for an organization, I am a part of that community. The job is, I won't do things that don't reflect my integrity, and I won't advocate for a community that I'm not involved in. So even if we don't move forward the first couple of years, and my partner's here, and they're probably thinking, I'm not packing again, Laura. But I would stay and participate. I would come in on the weekends and go to events. To me, you can't be advocating for a city and not be tied to the city. And so, short answer is not right away, but I would be here as much as possible. I used to drive back and forth from Mount Pleasant to Detroit, 2.5-hour drive every week. Driving back and forth to Battle Creek is nothing to me. Thank you for the question. Any other questions?
Can you share how you measured the success of DEI initiatives or programs in the past?
Absolutely. So whenever I do measurements, I do it in a triangle way or a threefold way so that we're not just looking at one result. I do a qualitative. So I'll give an example of when I embedded DEI into the whole program at the university, the whole department, so that the curriculum had it, so that they taught it, students knew it. First thing I was survey. And it was about everything with DEI and everything you were going to learn as a public service individual. If you were taking a finance class, you got asked about was DEI brought up. You also got asked about was leadership talked about, so that I could capture everything that was happening there. So students filled that out pre-class, and then they filled it out post survey, and it was coming from the next class and the next, but it really helped us capture things that we may not have thought about. And I had a lot of pushback on that survey because they said, no, only do a survey about finance for the finance class. Well, what if we were teaching something broader than finance in that class? We would show how it tied to other classes and where we're missing things. So that was the first treatment. Then I took papers from classes, or if it was something within the city, let's say it's a DEI training, I would have the pre and the post survey. What do you know about this before coming in? What do you feel like you know about this now? Right? Give me a level. Then I would access and assess what the training topic was about and see if a difference was made. Right now I have multiple trainings online at LCC, and I usually get one call a day that someone says, oh, I ran into this part of this training that we were talking about, and I carried it right into my meeting, and we talked about it, and it was an amazing thing for this skill. And then I usually reach out to either having another person in training with me who can assess things as it's going on, or I record my piece of it. I try and never record people in the meeting, that's not fair. So I've done then the trifecta. I do at least one quantitative and at least one qualitative and throw in the others. So quantitative is numbers, qualitative is words. And I look at how is this impacting. And I may come back and assess it in 3 months. Right? Sure, everybody's going to give the feedback right away. I learned this or I didn't learn that. But what about in 3 months? Is it sticking? Or are we feeling like it is something that it's just going into the brain and out of the brain? So I'm always in those multiple stage, making sure and then changing things around. Thank you for the question.
Hi, my name is Kat. I'm really curious about what your approach would be for resistance, because I just want to, you know what I mean? As much as we want to say, you know, like we're all for diversity, equity, inclusion, the reality is that, you know, even within the city employees, that there will be resistance in the community. And in the ongoing of like white nationalism, what's your strategy of working with like young white men that are being radicalized? Like, what's your strategy?
So with that, I have a lot of opportunity in the family that I grew up in, individuals who did not think DEI was important. Lots of isms. They were omniists. Everything that you can be an ism about, they were. It's talking to one another. It's saying it's not you. It's the words you're using. It's talking about how, for most of us in the United States of America, we were taught in public education, maybe a few African-American individuals, maybe something about the Spanish War or the war in Mexico. That's about it. As far as diversity treatment were done in the public school systems. So you have to step back and realize these individuals are coming from a, why do I need this? What's important about this? So I talk about it being a new language, because it is. We're all learning how to speak it, whether we've experienced racism, sexism, all of the isms our whole lives, or we're just not even acknowledging that those exist. So I say, let's pretend that you didn't know Spanish. And you studied it, and then you decided you're going to go into Mexico City, and you're only going to speak Spanish while you're there. You're not going to talk any other language. You're going to speak to everybody there with Spanish. There's going to be a point where you, thinking that you have learned this and perfected this language, are going to go up to somebody and say, your mother's face is a beautiful foot. That then brings in the conversation of impact over intent. Impact is greater than someone's intentions. Like you say, what did you just say? If you're the individual speaking Spanish, they repeat it, And then hopefully someone is able to correct them. You just said my mother's face is a beautiful foot. I teach people that those are words. You had no intention to tell that individual their mother's face was a beautiful foot. But the words were wrong. The words weren't correct in the same language. And so you're gonna feel embarrassed. Again, that's that, oh, I'm scared, amygdala, lizard brain that comes out. That's gonna happen to you. So then I teach tools about how to say yes, I said that wrong, and I'm sorry, not, and I didn't mean to, and I'm sorry, period. And hopefully, I will also say, and I'd like to learn a little bit more. Can you tell me where I messed that sentence up? So if I have individuals who are unwilling to do that, then there's a whole way to approach them. What do they need? Where's our compromise? Where's our Venn diagram in the conversation of I don't want any diversity, or I don't believe that LGBTQ plus is a lifestyle that should be condoned? Where's the middle ground? And then talk about the big parts of the Venn diagram that aren't in there. So find the common ground. Our institution is moving towards this. It is now in our policies. It is now in our assessments. It's in your employee review. So you may not want to take this from the building here to your car, but while you're here, I'm going to teach you how to learn this new language, because it is part of our culture now. And say, I'm not making you believe it, but you do have to behave appropriately according to these policies while you're here. There are always going to be individuals who don't want anything to do with it and are going to holler and scream about it. It comes down to, is it a belief for that individual? I believe that that's wrong. I'm not going to change anyone's belief. As an individual, they have to change their belief. But I can show them the path to walk, to explore the belief. I can talk about the differences in their belief and the belief of this group of individuals. And say, these are the ways you have to behave when you're at work. Because there are always going to be individuals who go home and drop it at the door here. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Kathy Linda Wilson, I'm Workforce Commissioner and the Chair of the Human Relations Board. I am really pleased to see your passion, and also my question was exactly what Tom had asked, but I have a follow-up question. What is really in this polarized environment? How do you get through those who are really just kind of super resistant? And I think, again, you answered that really well. But I also think that there is a part of this work that's going to have to be really intentional about box checking, right? So when it comes to accountability, when we talk about embedding it into our performance reviews, what sort of authority do you think you're going to need to have to impact the city as it relates to holding folks accountable to the things that if we say this is us based on our values and what you're doing is misaligned with that, what will the accountability look like and how we make sure that you are creating that?
So one of the great things about government is we have all of these laws and legislations, but what I would need would be a policy overview that says this is something that we are doing, this is how you have to behave or act or talk. If someone says, hey, wait a minute, you are discriminating against me, you're harassing me, what you're saying isn't appropriate in our new environment, then we have to think about what are the steps. How do we want to approach that? Also in my trainings, I'm never a one checkbox individual. My second training, you're going to walk away with facilitation tools to be able to engage one another when your lizard brain amygdala comes up and you're ready to fight, flight, or freeze. We give you sentences to say, we act them out. It's facilitating conversations is a part of this work that we're not doing well, in my opinion. We're not teaching people how to say, that impacted me. This is how it did. And then look at the response. And we're not teaching people to say, my intentions were this, and you should take my intentions. No. Impact on an individual is greater than intention. And if we start our policies on that premise, from our diversity statement, our mission and vision, and build them that way, we will change the culture slowly. DEI change is not something that you come in and turn left or right really fast on when it happens. It's a slow change. If you go to school for it, the first thing they teach you is, don't talk about race for the first year, because it scares everybody. Because if I start talking about race, that will make other people uncomfortable, and then they won't come to me. It's a slow process, but it's an intentional process. And there will be people who say, you're not doing it fast enough, right? We can't, because we're taking the old systems, we're inserting new pieces and new ways of doing things that most of us have never had to do before. And we're moving forward. We're changing the way that we do things. And that's really hard, because we've been doing it however long we've been alive. And so having strong policies that are supportive, and I'm a really big individual who believes in reforming, right, in any way possible. I work with Nadia Fisher on her prison project. She works with individuals who were wrongly accused and incarcerated and have been released from the system. And she has a 0% recidivism rate, which is amazing. Because that means that anybody that left jail, and most of the individuals she works with have been in there 15, 20 years, don't go back for any reason. And that's very unusual from individuals that have been in prison that long. And the treatment that she does is talking and walking them through like it's a brand new world. Because it is. If you've been a part of the justice system and incarcerated, you've been in there for a while, coming back out, it's a whole new thing. You change cultures forcefully, and that's a quick change. We want to do this slowly, intentionally, and sustainably.
All right, got one last question, because we have to kind of switch into the next candidate.
Hi, nice to meet you. Question, do you have any experience working with the Latino community? So can you share?
Absolutely. So my last name is Orta. So my first partner was Latina, Hispanic. Growing up in Southwest Detroit, we actually have Mexican town, where I spent a lot of time, not just as a child, but then as an adult with his family and friends that are down there. At Lansing Community College, I worked on starting a Hispanic Heritage Month. We have a whole building that is the Caesar Chavez Community Center, where we're servicing students, and the community college has never done a Hispanic Heritage Month, not once. So I brought in dancers from all over, because it's not just Hispanic, Latino, right? There's individuals from the Caribbean, and there's Afro-Latinos, Latinas. It is a deep culture, like any culture is. And there are multiple things to represent. This year, we're working with the city of Lansing to put on a week-long opportunity for people to come in who identify in that culture or tied to that culture, and show off the work that they do, recruit, and get to know one another, a little networking. Been a part of a lot of the Chavez movements around the United States,
to take about a 5-minute break. Please have some food while we switch and bring in the next candidate. Okay, we're gonna get started. If you would take your seats, that would be wonderful. All right, I'm excited to introduce candidate number 2. This is Keena Williams. Currently, she is the Chief Belonging and Title IX Coordinator at Albion College. We're really excited to hear what she has to share with us this evening. Turning it over to Keena.
Good evening, everyone. I almost did not make it into the building. I am terribly afraid of ducks. And they were playing with me on the walk up. I had to call my mama and say, Mama, you need to pray that God moves the ducks so I can get in here. And he did that, and so I am here and very excited to be here. Up until the end of July, I served as the Chief Belonging Officer at Albion College. I tried really hard to allow purpose to guide me. And so I'm going to take you on a little journey of how my purpose has led me here tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about me, talk a little bit about my philosophy behind diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and talk a little bit about how I see myself supporting the work that you all have done in the equity audit for the city of Battle Creek. Little disclaimer, I am on a journey of trying to bring my most true and authentic self into every space. And so I promise you will get the most professional version of me tonight. But you will also get a little bit of at-home me in the mix, if that's okay. Awesome. So the journey. I grew up in Albion, Michigan, went to Albion Senior High School, graduated, and then very proudly went to the University of Michigan to study medicine. After failing 2 semesters of organic chemistry, I thought I needed to rethink my life choices. I tell you that because I recognize that there is something to be learned from each and every situation that we go through in life. And that situation of leaving the University of Michigan taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about what mattered to me. And I believe that was the beginning of me learning to find my voice, because there's nothing like having to tell your mama you're dropping out of school. So we went through all of that. After some time, some babies, and getting married, I felt the need to go back to school, and so went to Albion College, and that's where I graduated from. So this is my family. That first picture is my husband, LeVar, my daughters, Leah and Naya, and my sons, Amir and Nasir. So that first picture is the day I graduated from Albion College. That second picture was taken this year at my daughter Naya's graduation, and we will be taking her to Tennessee State University next week. She thinks I'm going so excited for her. She thinks I'm going to cry.
You will.
And I'm going to try to hold it till I get in the car. I just want to win this one. So I believe that in order to do this work, you have to have the heart of an advocate. And I can say unequivocally that my children are the thing that helped me to grow and develop that heart. My oldest son, Amir, he has autism. And the first time we went to an IEP meeting, I had no idea what to expect. And Amir, true to form, started cutting the monkey. Like, he would not be quiet, he wouldn't sit down. And so my husband had to take him out of the room. The person in the room then started to ask me some questions, some standard questions. I didn't realize they were standard at the time, and so I believe the impact of those questions was very different than the intent. So they began to ask me things like, do you feel safe? Do you feel threatened? I know now that those were standard questions meant to ensure the welfare and safety of people in the home, right? They ask those questions at the doctor's office, all kind of places. In my head, though, I thought, they think this big black man with this deep voice is gonna take this little black baby outside and do something to him to make him be quiet. They think that we are a stereotypical black baby mama, black baby daddy situation, and they are not going to take what I have to say seriously. And I can't advocate appropriately for my child if they don't take what I say seriously. So Amir is the one who lit the fire of advocacy in me, and he's also the reason I ultimately enrolled in and graduated from Albion College. Now, my advocacy has grown through the years, and I would say, like, my kids would be upset about me telling y'all stories about them, but they have learned to use my advocacy to their advantage when they think it's gonna get them out of trouble, so we gonna call it even. My youngest son, Nasir, is 15. He was a freshman at Marshall High School this past fall. I got a call one day from someone saying there were some students, some white students who Nasir considered to be his friends, who had been repeatedly calling him the N-word, and it had been going on for months. I have the principal's phone number, so I sent him a text, said we need to meet. So we set up the meeting. On the way to the meeting, though, I turned to my husband and I said, do you trust me? He said, Keena, what you gonna do? And I said, I promise you, I will advocate for our son. But he has me. There are other students of color in the building who don't have me. And I can't leave that space without advocating for all of them. So we go to the meeting and we do the thing. We talk about the incident. We talk about my son. I ask questions. The principal says, do you have any more questions? I said, yes, I do. I asked questions about positive outcomes for my son. I asked questions about positive outcomes for allies in the building. I asked questions about positive outcomes for the students who were responsible for calling him the N-word. When I left that meeting, I sent a detailed email with everything we had discussed and a couple other things. It included forms and policies and templates, transformative initiatives, and I promised him that I would be there to support them as they walk through that. And I probably should send him an email tonight to see where we are for this year, because I believe that students in that building need advocates. Now, I also recognize it is not my responsibility in this type of role to be simply a voice for the voiceless. I've heard people say that. I think my responsibility is to use my sphere of influence to make space for the voices that are already talking. Because they're talking. People may not be listening, but they're talking. So my family is the reason why I do this work. I believe this is both head and heart work. In order to move the needle from a place of having conversations about diversity to a place where we are experiencing belonging, I think attention to both is necessary. So I try to always lead with my heart. Now, if I took a look at some of the priorities that you all have listed in the audit, and I tried to place them in terms of, are these head things or are these heart things, this is kind of where I ended up. I think they're both. I believe each stage of the work and each priority requires both. As we look at these things, it's clear that there's a lot of head work involved. But there's an equal amount of hard work involved. And I believe that those who oppose conversations around diversity equity, inclusion, and belonging, or those who oppose critical race theory are operating out of a place of fear. They begin to question things like, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my family? What do I have to give up in order for these things to come to fruition? And I think if you are operating out of a place of fear, those are valid questions. So it's necessary for me to remember, recognize, and work on the heart aspects of what that is. I believe it's essential that we are intentional about addressing those fears early and often. So what does that look like in practice? It looks like lots of conversations. It looks like lots of opportunities for feedback. It looks like lots of listening to people share their fears and concerns. But it also looks like transparency. It also looks like being clear and upfront and honest about the decisions that we're making as we're creating policies or changing things. It looks like providing opportunities for feedback to see where people are. It looks like constantly and consistently addressing those fears of the heart while we're doing this brain work. It looks like building trust. And trust that the work we are doing is important and a benefit to all of us. Scholars have identified 4 forms of racism, 4 levels of racism. Personal, interpersonal, institutional, and structural. So the personal racism refers to what's happening within a person, like the beliefs and biases that they hold, the things that they think about, their thoughts. Interpersonal has to do between people, right? So how do those biases, thoughts that I have, play themselves out as I engage with or interact with others? What does that look like when I'm passing people on the street? What does that look like when I'm sharing an elevator with folks? What does that look like as I'm engaging at work or across the community? Institutional racism occurs in institutions or systems of power. It has to do with the policies and practices and procedures of an institution. Think of school or workplace, right? And how those policies and practices routinely produce racially inequitable outcomes for people of color and advantages for white people. Then structural racism is a racial bias that occurs among institutions and across society. This involves the cumulative and compounding effects of an array of societal factors, including the history, culture, ideology, interactions with institutions, and policies systemically privilege white folks and disadvantaged people of color. I believe a good equity audit and the process you all engaged in to set your strategic priorities addresses issues of racism at all levels, and yours does. So then I started thinking, okay, Keena, if you had to put the priorities from the equity audit into these categories, what would that look like? And it looks like my last slide may be a little altered, but that's okay, because it's gonna make sense in a minute. Now, well, maybe not, because I realized if I put this slide together, like, you know, this ain't gonna make sense to nobody. So you're gonna get a little bit of how my brain thinks through this. Now, let me be clear. There are definitely places where each of these go, each of your priorities will go by definition, right? For instance, the priority of hiring a dedicated DEI leadership person would fall under institutional racism, or the creating equitable
Well, we gonna find them. There it is, ensuring compensation equity, that's not what I'm about. The goal of ensuring compensation equity with all of the institutional, right? But as I begin to think through what areas are in at every stage that we would have to go through to accomplish a goal, I think so if we think about ensuring compensation equity, the personal racism comes into play as soon as the email is sent out to set up the meeting. Folks' thoughts and beliefs are going, they go home, they talk about this thing that's coming with their families and their friends, right? And so then that changes the ways in which those folks engage or interact once they come into the meeting for us to talk about it, right? You can't have that meeting without getting opportunities for feedback, hearing what people have to say. And once that's institutionalized, you hit the institutional level, those folks are gonna go back home and have conversations again about what this feels like, what it means for them. At the same time, the city has the opportunity to leverage the fact that they have done this on other organizations across the community, and now we're affecting structural racism, right? So I think we have the opportunity to touch it all and do it all, but it's gonna take time and it's gonna take hard. Now I realize I could have came before you and out of how I would address each and every one of these things, but that means I would have thought about this in a vacuum. And this is not my work alone. It will be work for everyone to do. And so I hope that in the short things that I've said tonight, that you don't see me as a cultural fit, but as a value and a cultural add to the community of Battle Creek and the work that you would like to do as a part of your equity.
First of all, we love our guts. But you see yourself in diversity about advocacy, which is something I'm very passionate about. But is there any something you really want to focus on with the community as far as advocacy and
I think it's necessary. In order to do this work, you have to be an advocate. And so, yes, that is there. It is a part of how I function and so that's what I would do. And I guess I have to say, like, I use the word work in talking about this. I don't view this as work. This is like life to me.
So I am new to, like, in my company, I started a role in DEI, and I love it, right? And we have these, like, big agendas, and I'm reading this book to kind of, like, help me as I'm figuring it all out, and it's a lot. And the book was touching on how a lot of times women of color, we take out individual, like, it's so much, right? And I see it, people who are passionate about the work, and we just want to speak it all. So how do you take care of yourself, right? Because that's important. If we want you to come in and do all of this, how do you make sure that, you know, you don't burn out? How do your allies help you?
Yeah, so I have a strong team of support. I'm show up every day with a smile on my face and we're gonna do this work. I might go home and yell and scream and cuss at folks. Because it's hard sometimes, and it's stressful, and it's draining to deal with race and racism every day. Like, I go to work to fight. But I know that going in, and so have built some avenues and outlets to be able to manage that.
Hi, nice to meet you. We have a very big population, a Latin community in the city. And then I would like to know if you have experience working with the Latin community, and also do you have not elected in this position, do you have a plan to move into benefits?
Okay. We're gonna try to get all of those. So, I don't know if you all are aware, so the college has drastically shifted our student demographics over the last 7 years. And so we went from a place where we had about 10% students of color to where our incoming classes are coming in about 45% students of color. And that increase has been mostly in African American and Latinx students. And so have worked with those communities to do some work. Now, in terms of, do I have a plan for your community? My answer is gonna be no, because I'm 100% certain that you all have thoughts and desires and things that you would like to see. And so my plan is to listen, and to make space for you all to do and see the things that you would like to do and see. What was your last question? Move to Battle Creek. So, I'm just gonna say it. I'm actually running for mayor in Albion right now, so not right now. But it's like Albion about, that's close. That's a hop, skip, and a jump. Yeah.
Speaking of mayor,
Mhm.
you'll notice that our mayor, who is a white male, just left, which to me signals that this is not his top priority. How will you respond to people like that in our community within the city, who are employees, who have been here a long time and have thoughts about DEI and are dismissive of DEI? Not to say that he in particular is dismissive of DEI. But how will you work with those people? And what sort of accountability will you have, will you encourage the city to have for them?
Amen. That's a whole question. So he did say to me that he had to go pick up his son from football.
Oh, good.
Yeah. And my son is at football as well, so I get that. We're gonna run into that wherever we are. Which is why I talked about head and heart work. I can't do this if I can't reach out to the heart of folks who are dismissive, don't believe in it, don't think about it, show them something different, answer some of those fears that they may have about why this is not the thing that they want to see happen. But ultimately, we're gonna move this ball forward. And so it's gonna take time and trust and patience and growth, and people being willing to see that the changes that are being made are a benefit to everybody. And they're not meant to punish a subset of people, but to move all of us forward. Yes, sir. And then we can.
So I have a couple of questions. I have a couple of questions. I understand.
Is it on?
I don't know.
It's
Yeah,
more-
I'm pretty loud enough.
You outside, we got it.
It's more helpful for those who are listening on the area.
Oh, online, okay, I'm sorry. So, yeah, I have a question. What do you need from your African-American employees that are employed within the city to help propel the change in culture? That's part A. Part B, how do you feel about the timeline? And I ask you about the timeline because, really quick, we ain't got time for this. And we don't have time to hold hands. We don't have time to warm people up. We don't have time for your fear. We don't have time to make you comfortable. There's a whole group of the population that's been uncomfortable for quite some time. So your comfortability is neither here nor there, because my uncomfortability has been neither here nor there. The timeline of cultural change being one of the most difficult things to change. How do you see that happening? Because I'm not on the slow path. Yeah, we played the slow game. And in 2022, we're either moving or we're not moving. So how do you feel about the timeline in that space?
Awesome. So your first question, what do I need from African American employees? I need them to talk and be willing and ready to move. We have to do both. We have to move and we have to make time, right? And so as we're having conversations with those who are fearful or who don't understand, at the same time, we're making plans and we're moving. Both things have to happen at the same time. Both of them are necessary. And so that's how I see it. The timeline being,
in all honesty, it's gonna be what it is. Like, some things are gonna move forward really quickly, some things are gonna take time. And I think it's just getting the buy-in from the community to say, these are the things that are important, and these are the things that we're moving forward while we are making time, addressing these other concerns, and doing some groundwork to get people ready for the next step. Does that help?
Hi, and thank you. Representative Wilson, I'm Ward 4 City Commissioner, and I'm the Chair of the Human Relations Board. Thanks so much for being here and your interest in supporting us in this important work. I'd like you to tell us two things. One, in this work that you've done around belonging, diversity, equity, inclusion, which I really appreciate the inclusion of the word belonging, because I think it's really critically important. What is the thing you're most proud of that you've accomplished in your career, and then what has been the most challenging, if you would mind sharing?
So we were able to create a blueprint for belonging at the college. And that blueprint essentially did a number of things. One, it said to everybody, like, the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging does not belong to one person or one department. We all have a responsibility in this. That blueprint asked every unit at the college to think about their role in increasing belonging. And we were able to do that. I think we got like 99% of the departments in, and those departments who didn't submit a blueprint, it was because of major turnovers or other issues. So very proud of that work. That was also very difficult work to do for a number of different reasons. Some of the reasons that you asked about, right? We had folks who were afraid of what that meant. We had folks who thought that that meant we were putting in systems so that we could get people fired. We had folks who thought that it was a bunch of hooey and why should we do it? And we had folks who like blamed all of our issues on the changes in demographics and were unwilling to think about the role that they played in that work. I think equally important, so we had to read all of these blueprints. And I think when we talk about the emotional work that goes into this, like that was very difficult, because then you have on paper departments that you can see like are holding on to bias and are viewing our students in ways that are not helpful or productive. But that also opened the door for us to have some difficult conversations, for us to move some things along, for us to be able to identify areas where we had some serious work to do. So it is both one of the most fulfilling things I've done and also one of the most challenging.
Good evening, thank you. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked the previous candidate. So how have you measured, or what metrics have you used to determine whether or not a DEI initiative or a program was successful?
So we've used demographic data, hiring data, satisfaction surveys, all of those types of things are there. What I think has been most impactful for me, I don't know if I have a key performance indicator to like identify it, but it's when the language that I use comes back to me. When students, faculty, staff, community members, and others are talking about belonging and what that means. And I hear that from folks that I know I haven't had a conversation with. When I hear student leaders using that language and they're working with incoming students, I know we're making a culture shift. And that is the thing that I look for.
Good evening, my name's Kat. I just love what you said about how this work is not just you, right, but like it's a collective work, so having those action plans be like really rooted in a collective voice. So I appreciate that humility and leadership skill and wisdom. And my question is more about what would success look like for you in year one and year two? Like what would be your priorities in terms of would you focus within like the city, like, you know, doing like, I don't know, like the hiring practices and changing, making sure that the city does have employees that really reflect the community, like, you know, concrete example of like what are your strategies and focus for year one? in alignment with the action plan.
I would like to say that the focus in year one would be mostly internal, right? Internal within the city. Excuse me. But I think equally as important is going to be the connections across the community and how we move that work, right? And so I think coming in day one is really beginning to figure out what are the things that we can do internally within year one and what are the things that we can do across the community in year one. I don't think I'm worth my stuff if I can't operate in both spaces, and so it will require some moving and navigating in both spaces. But I don't want to assume, again, that I know what this community wants to see first and foremost. Like, you have a set of priorities and goals. Some of those are more important to some folks than others, and without having conversations, I don't know what that is. The other thing that I recognize is, even though there are a set of priorities listed, there are things that people really want to see happen right now. And so having those conversations with folks across the community and across the city, within the city, is going to be crucial in identifying how we move forward. And there may be some things that were not identified as priorities that come out as things that really need to be moved forward quickly. And so you gotta talk, you gotta listen. I gotta listen to hear where people really want to go. Yes, thank you.
Can you tell us the time that you had changed your style of work to kind of work better or effectively with a person from a different background?
I don't know if I've changed my style to do that. I'm gonna try to always be me. And that's gonna be a listening, caring person. So I work with students for a very long time. Students protest on college campuses is what they do. And as an administrator, I recognize, like, administrators get really freaked out when students protest, right? I don't. Is what they do. So the last protest we had, well, no, I'll go back. 2015, we had protests on campus. Students were protesting across the nation. We had an incident where a white student was using the N-word out loud in the cafeteria following a class discussion about who could use that word. So our students of color are all upset. We have, like, massive meetings. They want to protest. Folks are like, what are we gonna do? So I call the student who's the head of our Black Student Alliance. And I ask, like, what's the goal? They tell me, Keena, we want change. Do you feel like protest is the best way to accomplish that goal? Well, Keena, if it's not a protest, what is it? Okay. I said, well, you had a conversation with the president. He's told you that he's looking for solutions. Do you have some? Yes, we have demands. I said, do you have demands or do you have solutions? He said, we have solutions. I said, okay. Let's use the institution's words against itself to say, if this is the thing that you say that you stand for, show us. Here are some solutions that, as students, we believe would be helpful. We talked through that document, like, we word checked it, we spell checked it, we got other academic scholars to weigh in on it. We talked about who was going to the meeting with the president, right? So they had cross representation from across campus, athletes, Greek life, white, Black, Latinx, like, and they did the thing. The president agreed to all of it. I can't be so concerned with keeping peace that I'm afraid of disruption when it's necessary for change.
Good point.
So that's how I'm functioning. Did that help?
And I'm also assistant support at the career center, so when you talk to me, they already been there and I've been there and I just want to change.
For the individuals who you say have something to say but have not been heard, how do you, bring their voices out? How do you, let them be heard?
So that takes a number of different forms for me. Sometimes it's listening, sometimes it's bringing them along with me into spaces to share their own account and their story and their ideas. I think, again, core to who I am is making space for people. I don't have all the answers. I'm not gonna pretend like I do. So I'm gonna make space, whatever that needs to look like in any given situation. We had an increase in DACA and undocumented students on our campus. There were concerns. We had not, as an institution, prepared for that. We hadn't thought through what challenges were coming. We hadn't thought through what supports were needed. If people ask me what I do, normally I say I'm a professional pop stirrer. And so what I did was I went to people who I knew cared about those students and their concerns, built a coalition of folks who were willing to, because at the time I was in a lower administrative role, who were willing to go to upper administration and voice those concerns. And I'm always gonna be a part of the process. Sometimes it's behind the scenes, sometimes it's in front. But if I myself cannot move the needle, if I myself cannot make space, I will find people who can and who will. I don't have a problem doing that. I actually enjoy it. It's the favorite part of what I get to do, because that means that the things that are important to people on the ground are getting addressed. Yes.
I just have one more question. So often we talk about diversity, and we talk about diversity in hiring, whether that be the LGBT community, or whether that be minorities of any group. My question to you is, what do we plan on doing about setting the groundwork for these interjections of individuals into our workforce and environment? And what I mean by that is, what trainings are we having to prepare the organization for this influx, if it happens, of different people with different backgrounds and different viewpoints? So what sort of trainings, or do you even plan on doing anything on the forefront in laying the groundwork for this time?
So first I want to say those individuals are probably already here. Training, yes. Workshops, yes. I have a group of folks that I work with from across the state that specialize in different areas for trainings and things of that nature. What is important though is to understand where folks are. I can bring in folks to do a workshop or a training. For some people that's gonna be a huge benefit. For some people it's gonna be a waste of time. And so I think we have to build a scaffolded approach to what training and workshops look like, so we can build some foundational pieces and other pieces for folks at different stages. I think we have to have all of that. Trainings at multiple levels that touch multiple areas, that hyper-focus on some areas. All of that has to be there. A scaffolded approach is what I would want to build.
So I'm wondering if you have worked with members of the disability community?
Yes. Yes, I have. So we, working at a college is fun, right? We have over 100 student organizations there, and if we don't have it, students can build it. So we had an influx of students on the spectrum come to campus interviewing. We weren't prepared, we didn't know. And we allowed our students to lead us in those efforts, making space for them as a student organization, making sure they had funding, supporting them and bringing in resources and speakers, but also giving them a voice and a space at the table. So as a part of the work that I did, we had a President's Advisory Committee for Intercultural Affairs, invited the president of that student organization to be a part of it, and began to build a coalition around accessibility across campus and what that meant. But again, I don't have all the answers, so I'm gonna look for people who do, and that's how we do that work.
Any other questions? This is your last chance. Let's thank Keena. Okay, I just want to thank everybody who's watching us on the live stream. Please know that we want you to have an opportunity to reflect on what the candidates shared with us tonight. We are going to leave the online information and feedback open until Monday. So, you don't necessarily have to provide that today. You can go back and think. If you have other questions, please feel free to reach out to my office, Human Resources, and we'll do our best to get an answer. Thank you very much. Your input is really important. I had somebody ask, who makes the decision about this job? Well, it actually falls on me as city manager, but please know we're getting as much input from our community, internally of the organization and externally in the community. That's why we did this presentation the way that we did, and we hope that you will provide that feedback so that can be part of the decision-making process. Commissioner Gray.
Thank you, City Manager Clary. I just wanted to ask you to expand upon that reply as far as next steps. You mentioned the online questions and comments through Monday at 5, I believe, and that the decision rests with you. Can you kind of give a timeline as far as what's happening after those, the question and comment period ends, until you get to that decision? Can you give any more specifics in that?
Yes, I can, and thank you for allowing me to do so. So we will gather all that information by Monday after 5. I want to get back with the group that was part of our interview team. I see several members here, Jose, Kyra, Ellie Johnson, Michelle Hall, Ted Deering, and I. We will review all of that data that we have received over through the end of Monday and come to a consensus about where we are. I think the hard part is if it's a tie. Let's just think about that, because we have 2 great candidates. However, I hope to utilize that team to help influence the decision, because it's incredibly important. And that group has been with us on this journey since it started and was requested. They certainly should be part of the journey as we bring this position on. Any other questions? Great. Any other questions of me? Yes.
Yeah, thanks, for allowing me the opportunity to ask you a question. I think that really, impractical to think that one DEI officer, one person will be able to tackle all of the different needs, especially in a single year. As a city employee, as a city resident, I have an abundance of asks as well as input to provide, and I just don't see how one person, will be able to do that. So I hope that that's being thought of.
That is great. We did have a question at some point, I can't remember how it came in, about, what does the staff look like? Right now, we're taking this first step. And you're right, we want to make sure that whomever becomes our very first diversity, equity, inclusion officer, we set them up for success. So I will rely on their expertise and experience as they get to know the organization and the community, continue to utilize the equity audit and that action plan to inform our next steps, that will have to be a conversation, because you're not right, one person can't do it, but it's also not that person's total responsibility. I think I heard both candidates say, it is the organization's responsibility to take ownership and figure out where we're headed as an organization, as a staff, as a community, and those are next steps. Again, this is just the very first step on our organizational journey. We all are on our individual journeys, and we don't have all the answers, and I appreciate everybody saying, we're not the expert here, but together we will work and figure out what those next steps look like. MGT has been very open about saying they will be with us along the way, and so we always have MGT to lean back on. But I also, part of that action plan talks about creating employee groups to inform the work. So I think there are some really first initial steps that I look forward to working with this position on and putting a map, but you're right, in 1 year, no. But at least, I hope that we're standing in front of our employees and our community a year from when this person starts, and we have made some steps on that journey, and we have the next roadmap to where we're headed.
Can you just, you went through the names of some of the folks who have been involved in this process, but I don't know that the community, since the community is watching, if they're here, can you ask them to, give a wave so people know who you're talking about?
I can. So the group that helped us put the scope of work together and review all the proposals, and has helped us on the interview process included Jose Orozco from Voces, and Kyra Wallace from the Urban League, Ellie Johnson from the Urban League, and then city staff, it was, I think Chief Blacker had to leave. He was part of those initial conversations. It was myself as city manager, Ted Deering as assistant city manager, and Michelle Hull as our HR director. So that is the group, the work group that's been moving. But we've had a lot of other people share experiences. We have leaned into the Human Relations Board on this, so I thank Commissioner Nanda Wilson and her leadership there that has gotten that group involved to help inform our next steps and are willing to be that help as we go into year 1 and we plan for our journey and roadmaps in year 2, 3, 5. So I feel really good that we have a good supportive team internally and externally to help inform this work. And we're not going to get it right all the time. There will be hiccups, so we're going to ask for grace, and we'll ask for that input when we do things well and when we don't do things well, and we'll use that to kind of change a course or to think differently about next steps. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Please make sure you grab food if you didn't have any, and we will keep you posted as we go through. Please encourage people to take a look at the recording from the live stream so that they can also provide their input by Monday, the 15th at 5. Take care and safe travels.
Okay.
Don't kill me, don't kill me.
I'm just so happy to